Hey everyone, this is your host, Andrew Holland. Thank you so much for listening to the Andrew Holland podcast each and every week, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. As an entrepreneur who's been through a lot of highs and a lot of lows, I started this podcast to be a source of weekly motivation, inspiration, and support for all of us who are working to achieve something meaningful. And as importantly, so that none of us ever have to feel alone or isolated while we're doing so. Together, we explore the stories of successful people, we get insight and advice from individuals who have accomplished amazing things. We discuss practical and fascinating business models and strategies, and we dive deep into understanding ourselves as human beings. So please, help me grow our group and subscribe to the show on your favorite audio platform. Subscribe to, watch, and thumbs up our episodes on our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast. Follow and interact with me on Twitter and Threads. My handle is A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast. That's probably my favorite part of the whole podcast is the interaction I get with our guests and with you as our listeners. Lastly, if you enjoy the show and you want to support what we're working to accomplish, please share our show with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues at work. This show is nothing without you and your support, and I'm so incredibly thankful for each and every one of you listening, watching, and sharing the podcast every single week. Now it's time to get our motivation, inspiration, and support for this week and jump into today's episode. In today's episode, I share part one of my conversation with Bobby Vossoughi, the CEO and founder of Starry Night Consulting and the Starry Foundation. His consulting firm helps nonprofit organizations plan a fundraising event from start to finish. And his foundation, the Starry Foundation, focuses on helping families with autistic children, which he knows from personal experience through his daughter, Ellie. Bobby shares his personal journey and the lessons he learned from his father's entrepreneurial experiences. He emphasizes the importance of embracing failure and learning from past mistakes. And he also discusses the influence of his immigrant parents immigrating from Tehran, Iran, and their entrepreneurial spirit. He shares the story of how he transitioned to Starry Night Consulting and the Starry Foundation, which we just talked about focuses on helping families with autistic children. Bobby is incredibly passionate about what he does, and you'll hear it in his voice when you listen, and I think you'll enjoy it as much as I did.
While Andrew Holland is a CPA, a real estate broker, and involved in multiple businesses, including some investment companies, the Andrew Holland podcast is for informational purposes only. All of Andrew's views and those of his guests are solely their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of any of the businesses or companies Andrew or his guests are affiliated with. You should not treat any advice, conversation, business recommendation, investment recommendation, or anything of the like as a specific inducement to make a specific business decision, take a specific action, make a particular investment, or follow a specific business or investment strategy. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the show.
Bobby, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast.
Andrew, thank you for having me.
So I am a big believer that the most successful people study other successful people. That's why I started this podcast, and it's what all of our listeners are looking for, to learn about people. So I also believe that in order to understand how you've become successful with Starry Night Consulting, we'll talk about that, and the foundation that you started for sensory processing disorder for children. That's children kind of on the autistic spectrum, right?
That's correct.
You had your own experience with your daughter, Ellie. Want to talk all about that. But we have to understand where you came from and your history and how you got to where you are.
Sure.
So give us some background. Where were you born and raised? What were your parents like? Were they entrepreneurs? Give us a sense of what made you so entrepreneurial where you are today.
Well, I was born in Dallas, Texas. My parents were immigrated from Tehran, Iran, and my dad and mom went to school at Texas Tech, and my dad ended up becoming a civil engineer and got his master's from SMU, and I was born in that little window. And, you know, we spent, though, the majority of my childhood in the Bay Area, college at the University of San Francisco on a tennis scholarship.
Okay.
And Stayed there for grad school because I didn't know what to do. I was in that stage where I was not clear. And so I'm like, you know what? I love sports. I'm going to get the sports management master's. And I stayed there.
So what brought your family from Dallas to the Bay Area?
Family, I think, mostly. My mom had a lot of family in California, in part of it in Southern California, part of it in Northern California. But the big move was Northern California.
Okay.
For us. I remember it very clearly from third grade on.
So that's when you moved, was in third grade?
Yes.
Because that's a big, Dallas, Texas is very different than San Francisco, California.
It's very different, night and day.
So that had to be, well, you remember it very distinctly. Tell us about what family got you there. What did your parents do for a living? What did your dad do? What did your mom do?
Well, it's interesting you ask. My dad was the type of person that, I aspire to be. He was an entrepreneur from day one. He always wanted to help people, but he had to learn the language out here. He was just one of those very, very fun people, but he also made a lot of mistakes and stuff that me and my brother and my mom had to deal with when he passed away I lost my dad at a very young age.
How old were you?
I was only 17.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he at that time was in the auto painting business. He was part of a company called Mako. I think it was the worst move. You asked me about what you learned from your past. I learned who to do business with, who you stay away from. There's a lot of family dynamics that went into that. And I learned about it, unfortunately, at a young age. When I lost my dad, I was dealing with making life insurance choices with my mom and things like that. I don't have that story of, meeting someone that I learned all the good things about the entrepreneurial business. I loved his courage. Didn't like the relationships that I ended up learning about after the fact, and just what the damage was to our family, because if I fast forward or rewind, however you want to put it, the last 2 years of my dad's life, he got back into what he was trained for. He was in civil engineering. He was flipping homes and was constructing and was so excited about it. And this was a guy that was, had severe brain cancer. So, and that's how I ended up losing him. But my point was, I learned, like, that last year, I ended up staying back in San Jose to be with him and to be with my family at a very crucial point. I didn't know at that time. I was too young, didn't know it was life ending.
Yeah.
But I ended up staying back and was with him, driving him everywhere because he couldn't drive at that time. But what I learned from him was he was just the most gregarious and giving person, which is a big quality I think I have and my brother has. He opened so many doors for people. He would always just, I just remember distinct stories when we were little of not knowing people in lines at Winchell's Donuts, and he'd buy donuts and coffee for 10 people. Wow. And that's what I still remember to this day.
I love what you talked about, and I actually think that what he gave you, based on what you've just described, is more powerful than people who only see the good. And, part of the reason that I started this podcast is I'm going to use the word infatuation with entrepreneurship in the American culture. It's a good thing, but we always glamorize and highlight the wonderful aspects of an entrepreneurial journey. And quite frankly, this isn't just for entrepreneurs. It's if you're a sports athlete trying to be an Olympian, if you're the president and CEO of a foundation, you're trying to raise a lot of money to help a good cause. I mean, it's any big purpose or mission that you're trying to accomplish in life, right? But for some reason, we focus on the 0.5% of the time that's the amazing success outcomes, when in reality, number one, where you learn the most from is all the failures. Ask anybody who's accomplished something big. I don't care, an Olympic star, an entrepreneur, it doesn't matter what it is. Any of, one of my favorite shows on the History Channel is Men Who Built America. Mm-hmm. And they talk about the bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge, the Panama Canal, some of the biggest projects that for those times were revolutionary. Right. And then they talk about the industrial age. And so much of that, and what the History Channel does a great job of, is they talk about all of the downfalls and the failures. and I just sit there and I learn and I absorb. So I think what your dad gave you is such a blessing in that you got to see, obviously you went through some really challenging stuff, both professionally and personally with the family. But I don't think you would be as successful as you are today had you not gotten the opportunity to see the real rough side of things. And I know people, and we all know people, maybe second or third generations. You look at some of the wealthiest people in the world, and you look at some of their children who've always had everything they wanted, never had any, I'm going to say, real world problems. They're a mess. They're a mess. Now I'm generalizing, but because financially or dealing with family situations, and money doesn't solve family situations. As a matter of fact, a lot of times it makes it a lot worse. But our focus on that 0.5%, I believe, is actually a destructive force for anybody trying to accomplish something meaningful, because it sets expectations like, oh, okay, so I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to have all my time to myself. I'm going to be loaded. I'm going to be able to do everything with my family. And it's just the opposite. Especially when you're starting off, no money, no time, lots of stress, being pulled in different directions, have to wear 50 hats. And so I love how you were honest about, you know what, your dad taught you some really important lessons in a really hard way. And that's a real big blessing. And, a lot of people always want to jump to the successes. I'm actually more interested in the failures, because when I look at myself, and I've talked to tons of entrepreneurs now, they always credit their failures for their successes.
100%.
And for some reason that doesn't connect. And that's a big reason why I think it's so important for all of us just to be honest about those things, and why this podcast is really focused on. Of course, we want to talk about the successes,
Sure.
but let's not sugarcoat it and say it just comes easily, because I think in this day and age, especially with cell phones, and you probably see this with your kids. You have 3 kids? Two kids, a daughter, Ellie, and then a son.
Yep.
Everything comes so easily for them and so quickly that my concern is the challenges that they're going to have mentally, because nothing in life comes that quickly or that easily if you're trying to accomplish something really meaningful. So I appreciate you talking about that, because that's exactly the point of the whole podcast. So you said something that sparked my interest. Did your dad get into business with some less than forward people that caused some of the issues?
There were just a lot of family members that were part of my mom's family. And one thing that I want to share also is that, my mom passed away a few years ago, but she was the one really that raised me and my son, me and my brother, at critical ages of our lives. From he was 14 and I was 17, and she had to pick up the pieces, and she was the one taking care of us at home while he was working, right? Yeah. But she was the one that had tremendous drive, tremendous will, and was, we were her life. So literally she would, till even a year before she passed, she went to back overseas because her family had a lot of real estate out there. So you talk about entrepreneurialism, she had a lot of that. She was selling land, buying land, and making sure that me and my brother still had a good life, and wouldn't, we started learning more and more about her resilience, her never would say no. And a lot of it, we also learned some valuable lessons, because she trusted the wrong people. We got burned, she got burned, and eventually, lost, potentially left hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table on acquisitions and things that she could have gotten better help with. And that's one thing that I love is finding the right networks and the right people that can really help you not just elevate your career, but elevate your personal life as well.
Yeah. So what's interesting is both of your parents were entrepreneurial, and let's be clear, behind any successful man, even behind any man, really is a strong woman. And you just highlighted that's a perfect example. And what I find fascinating is almost every entrepreneur that I talk to, their parents were somehow involved in entrepreneurship, and you got that from both sides of the family. Now, how old was your dad when he passed away from brain cancer?
He was 46.
Okay. So my grandma passed away at a very young age. And then my uncle did at like 48. I mean, that is the worst way to go. Pain. I just have I don't remember my Uncle Fred real well, but all I remember is the hospital images and just, it's like, make this stop. It's that painful. So I can sympathize with you on the impact there. Now, you said you stayed in San Jose. So were you guys spending some time in San Francisco and some time in San Jose?
No, I was, so my freshman year of college, I went to San Jose State University just to be at home with my dad. And then I got a tennis scholarship to the University of San Francisco that year while he was still alive, and went up to University of San Francisco when he passed. So like literally he passed the June of my would have been my sophomore year.
You were 17 when you went to college?
17, 18.
Okay.
And then when he passed, I was 17, going to college at 18, and then went to the University of San Francisco at 19, which would have been my sophomore year.
Yep. You said your parents immigrated here from Tehran.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. When did they come here?
They came,
did their parents come, or did
no,
they actually
they were
immigrate
the first.
from?
They were the first. So they as soon as they left in the Shah regime was happening or transcending, and they were coming here. So they had a lot of, they had brothers and sisters that were moving here too, and they all went to Texas Tech somehow, this big conglomerate, and they just wanted to get out. And thank God for me and my brother that happened.
Well, it's interesting you say that. One of the things that scares me about our country is we've been so incredibly blessed, and the people that I see in my daily life, and as we continue to progress, appreciate the most of what we have as Americans are immigrants, not natural born Americans, because we've had it so good. And so it doesn't surprise me that you have gotten to where you are because you know and appreciate through your parents just how good we have it here. Because look at Iran now, and look at a lot of these countries. And I think that's I think Americans who have been here for many generations, and of course we're a country of immigrants, somehow we as a nation have to get back to that recognition of just how blessed we are, because people like yourself who know what real poverty is, real hardship, and actually fearing for your life every single day, we just don't have a clue. I don't have a clue what that's like. And it's so helpful for me to talk with people like you who do have an idea like that. So we just need to be thankful for what we have and not take it for granted. And I fear we're losing that a little bit, not to go on that mantra, but it's people like you and other immigrants who are coming here and saying, you guys, do you realize what you have here? You've had for many, many decades. I mean, it's truly a blessing from God that I hope we don't continue to take for granted like I fear that we are. Anyway, I'll get off that mantra.
No, I understand.
You're in college. Your dad passes away, obviously a very, very challenging time. Mm-hmm. Your mom is doing everything she can for you and your brother. What's your brother's name?
Arash.
And he's 4 years younger than you are?
3.
Okay. Yep. Now, is he still in the Phoenix area?
Yeah, he lives in North Scott, so we live a mile from each other.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you and I were talking about before. So take us from college to where you are today, how you started Starry Night Consulting and the foundation.
Sure. Well, one of the big things I did was when I finished college, so I grad school 96 undergrad 96 and then graduated in 99 from grad school. I wanted to be closer to my brother. So he was going to ASU at the time. So I left the Bay Area and came out here, and remember vividly that I was one of my only, out of my network of friends, I bought the first house out here. I remember I was making $36,000 a year and bought my first house in Old Town, which I still wish I had. But it was,
the real estate here, for those who aren't from the Phoenix, you couldn't even buy a door for that salary at this point, especially in Old Town.
That's right. Yeah. And my mom helped me for sure. But I had a very difficult transition to come here, honestly, because my brother was still in the peak of college years and we were living together. And,
Mm-hmm.
Was
your mom back in San Francisco at that point?
No, she was going back and forth to Iran, honestly,
Oh,
to
yeah, you
try
said
to,
that. Okay.
she has family out there. So she would spend months and months out there and then she would come back, and eventually she relocated to be close to us out here. And all three of us lived here till, recently when she passed on.
And how old did you say she was when she passed?
She was 75.
And she didn't die of brain cancer? Or?
She died of cancer as well. So my parents both were cancer survivors and cancer, they lost to cancer at the end, but my mom actually had breast cancer when I was in 8th, 9th grade. And then a few years later, my dad got brain cancer. And then, so we've been that household that's always lived with cancer with both of our parents. And, it really debilitates people. And, it's just what we've learned.
Yeah. I think it just makes you and shows you what's really important in life. And I think that's another thing. I ask all of my guests, does money make you happy? And I'll ask you that same question. And overwhelmingly, the response is no. And I think when you go through things like that, you realize it's helpful to a certain point, but certainly not the priority. It just doesn't solve any of the real problems that come with sinful human living, really.
That's right.
So 1999, you and your brother are living here. Your mom's doing everything she can, going back back and forth from the United States to Iran. What was so difficult about that transition?
I got my master's in sports management. Very hard to find any jobs. So I was, my first job out here, I worked for a company called Household Finance, was selling, this was back, in that time, was selling like 15% mortgages to people. Just felt wrong doing it. And that's really how I've transitioned to what I'm doing today. Hated the job, was making like $24,000 a year and was just like dialing for dollars and just resented it to no end, and was just really not happy.
Yeah.
And remember kind of pivoting a few months later to another job that was another inside sales job, and just realized that's just not for me. And ended up resigning before I even had another job. And got really my first taste into the fundraising world at the Arthritis Foundation. So that was really when when people say you got to really be happy with what you do and things like that with your job, it's got to be your passion, your purpose. I really felt it for the first time when I worked for the Arthritis Foundation.
And how old were you at this point?
25, 24.
Okay.
And I was leading the number one fundraiser for them, which was called Joints in Motion. So they would literally train people for 20 weeks, and they would do marathons in Dublin, Ireland, and Amsterdam, and Maui, and Kona, and Honolulu, and San Diego. And my job was to basically oversee that program and help people raise the amount of money to go on these excursions. But it was great for me. I was single, ended up hiring one of my dear friends to this day to be, my right hand. And we traveled the world and met some amazing people and did some amazing journeys with people that were, raising money for an amazing cause to help their, someone they knew that was afflicted by this. And it was really the biggest turning point in my professional career, because I enjoyed what I was doing. I was selling a cause and selling a mission. And that's what really resonated with me. And honestly was the most important job that I had, because it's led me to where I am today for sure.
So let's talk about that. Starry Night Consulting, you are focused on helping nonprofits with a whole gamut of whether event management, website design, graphic design, pretty much helping them take a vision or an idea of an event for raising for whatever the cause is, to making it manifest and actually be a successful one. How did you transition and start that? Get to that point.
Sure.
You started it in 2017, 6 years ago, right? And then we'll talk about the foundation.
Sure. It's really interesting how it all formed. I was actually, if you fast forward, my first really philanthropy job was at the Arthritis Foundation. And then I pivoted a few years later, worked for a small nonprofit that was raising money for like financial literacy. Very tough thing to sell to a lot of people. There's not a lot of warmth behind it, even though it's needed. So I did that for a few years, and then got really catapulted by becoming one of the top fundraisers at Arizona State University. So I worked for many years developing funds to help the downtown campus to be where it is today. Worked with an amazing mentor of mine, Dr. Deborah Friedman, who's now passed on. Learned so much from her. And she gave me a real shot because my resume didn't have all the university level fundraising experience. And she's like, she interviewed me and she saw my passion and drive and hired me. And it was amazing because then I started learning how you build relationships, build networks, and got to pivot and led a team at Arizona State University's athletic department, a small fundraising team doing major gift fundraising. And I met some of the most successful people to this day, the warmest people, some of my dearest friends through ASU, and so grateful for it. But at that time, before I even started my event planning business, I was working for the man. I was working at ASU, then was always trying to create these systems and these like, hey, can you just pay me a percentage? I don't want a salary. I want to, I'm bringing in $10 million a year.
You believed in yourself.
Exactly. And everyone's in a salary mindset where I was like, how do I get paid commissions on this stuff? And there, and learned so much about myself and ended up working after ASU. Aramark Food Services was doing all the on-campus food for ASU at the time. So I met this great guy by the name of Brian Drew. And he's like, I think there's a spot for you at Aramark. You should, it's for profit but it's your relationship building that I like and your drive. So I ended up working there for about 5 to 6 years in different roles in food service design to the facility side, just selling to universities and whatnot. And
the meanwhile, building your relationships.
That's exactly it. At the same time, I had started putting on a big fundraiser every year called Starry Night. And we started 11 years ago to this day, and we had 50 people in the room. And it just gradually started growing and growing, and people would come to me at the event and they're like, how do we utilize some of your talents and you help do some consulting for us? And that was really my jumping off point was, ironically, I had no clients, and Ben Garland, who was on your podcast a few weeks ago, he was actually he was a chairman of the board for this organization called Kids Chance. And he said, hey, I just went to your event a couple months ago. Love what you do and love to get you to help consulting for us. I remember I ended up, I think I made $5,000, and I was like, this is my jumping off point. I'm just going to trust myself. And, 6 years later, we've built this platform, and our platform is very different. What I try to do is go into it with how can I help these organizations understand what they don't know. And why I started is because of all the pain points I had putting on our signature event called Starry Night, which helped kids on the autism spectrum. And I would look at all the pain points from check-in to check-out to receipting, all the things that weigh on you. So we started going, we could quarterback this event from soup to nuts, or we can just do a sliver of it. And now we have, a couple dozen clients, and it's growing, and we're adding, team members, but it all started because of my purpose. Yeah. My purpose was to give back through something that impacted my daughter. And then organically people started seeing that and seeing what experts we are in the event management space. And now it's taken off, and we work with so many great nonprofits, and I'm so grateful to work with them.
I want to talk about your daughter, Ellie, and how you started the Starry Foundation. But Bobby, your story has so many amazing lessons there. And one of the most important that I just heard you say without saying it was the patience you had before you started going out on your own? Everybody always thinks, and I know lots of people who are in the corporate world and they desperately want to be an entrepreneur, but you were focused on your purpose and you had to do a whole bunch of different jobs. But all the meanwhile, you're building your book of relationships, and you knew ultimately that you wanted to use those relationships for a higher purpose. But it took time. It took a lot of time and patience and doing things you didn't want to do. You probably weren't excited to work for Airmark Food Service and sell for 5 or 6 years, right? Not that you didn't enjoy it, but you wanted to be doing something of your own. I think that's what's missing in this day and age. I tell all my nieces and nephews, patience brings good things to those who are willing to wait for it. And nothing happens overnight. And your story is a perfect example of that. How many years you worked at different organizations, figuring out, you knew your purpose, but you had to take a bunch of different, whatever that word is, circuitous, or I can't say it, but different turns, twists and turns. You never know what it's going to take. But ultimately, as you just described, you got to it, you made the relationships, and it paid off. And so I just want to highlight that for our listeners, because again, if you're going to accomplish what you believe your true purpose is or what you're trying to do, don't always focus on today. Focus on, okay, this is where I want to be in X time. What are the important things? And even though I have to do some of these different things that don't seem like they align, or they're not something I jump out of bed every morning to do, how can I utilize it to my benefit to gain those skills, those relationships, whatever it is, to ultimately get to my goal? And you just described that perfectly.
No, thank you. I think people that know me think I'm pretty impatient. So it's great to hear you say that, because I do think I am patient in some regards. I think the one thing that I have that, a lot of people you've interviewed have is they bet on themselves. That eventually you have to bet on yourself. And I always felt like, you work hard, you play, you really have the right niche. One of my good friends says, there's riches in the niches. And I really believe that. I think that, when I tell people what I do, they're like, oh, that sounds amazing. You give back and this and that. And I said, but at the end of the day, I do the same thing you do, Andrew, the same thing we all do, which is you pick up the phone, you send texts, you send emails, you follow up, you follow through. The difference is I do it quick. I do it, I understand. I try to bring the same passion I have for my own foundation to all these nonprofits we help. And a lot of it is just coaching them. A lot of it is giving them reassurance. And then I have, like I say, it's your my right-hand person. My assistant is my glue. Rachel Corona does so much extra things that I can look at the bigger vision like you talk about. And she's really what's helped me really scale and really help us grow our foundation to where it's going now.
It takes a team, right? No one person can do it. Do you know Phoenix Children's Hospital?
Steve Schnall.
Yeah, Steve Schnall.
He's a great man.
He talked about, he shared his journey with us a couple episodes ago, and just the importance of team, no matter what you're doing, but particularly in the foundational arena or the foundation industry and fundraising. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of effort and motivation, and you're going to be told no 100 times. That's just not in foundations, that's everywhere. And so I want to talk about fundraising and how you've gotten so successful. But before we do that, Ellie, tell us about Ellie and how your experience at a young age with her ultimately led you to start the Starry Foundation, which focuses on, as you said before, kids that have autism.
Sure. Me and my ex-wife knew from a very young, before she was born, she was subchorionic hemorrhaging, my ex-wife. So a lot of bleeding, and we didn't even know if she was going to make it through the first trimester. Wow. And Ellie was a 4-pound baby, 4 pound, 10 ounces, very small.
Real small.
Never had to go to the NICU, which shocked me and Tiffany a lot. Because she was so small. Excuse me.
Yeah, 4 pounds, 10 ounces. I'm stunned that she didn't have to go to the NICU.
Yes, and she never stopped crying from the time we left the hospital till even today. You know, there's so many elements of this that are still today. I tell people that this journey started years ago. You know, my daughter's now 15, almost 16. But I didn't know what to do for her. I'm a problem solver, and at a young age, I didn't know what to do for her. So
You knew something was different.
yes,
You had friends with
we
kids, and
we went to developmental pediatricians. We went to occupational therapists. We ended up paying out of our own pocket to go to Denver, Colorado, to this place called the Star Institute. And that was the first time, and Ellie was around 6, that I got hope that I could do something for these kids like her. I went there, and it was a very comprehensive program. You met a developmental pediatrician, you met a psychologist, you met a parent counselor, you met a speech therapist, you met occupational therapist, you met a feeding team, you know, and my daughter was gluten intolerant at the time. We didn't know all this. She had all this bloating. And I went there and I said, you know, I'm going to come back to Phoenix and I'm going to raise money for this to help kids that can't afford it. And we're going to start a scholarship program. We're going to send these kids to Denver at the time because our foundation was not formed. And we're going to do something special. And it was because I had hope. And that was my cathartic way to help my daughter, was to help other families, because at that time I didn't have a great relationship with her, meaning just I didn't know what to do for her.
Yeah.
You know, and it was very high stress, high, you know, what people don't understand in the special needs space that I'm in, close to 90% have divorces. And I'm part of that statistic that I'm not proud of, but it's very high stress, high impact, high drama. And, you know, I take so much appreciation for quiet now, you know, because I just see these kids that are impacted with autism, low functioning, high functioning, mid functioning, and how much it can derail a family.
So talk to us about, because all babies cry, obviously, but talk to us about, for maybe parents who have newborns and they're in the same position that you and your ex-wife were in. Like, what's wrong? And we can't figure this out. What were the key symptoms that manifested themselves that made it pretty clear, okay, this is not normal. We need to figure out what's going on?
I think just the volatility of her, you know, she was late on all the markers in terms of just like walking, and she spoke, you know, just very quickly, like just very fast tones at a young age. But the biggest thing for us was just we could never stop, didn't know how to soothe her. And the things that soothed her were things now that are all white noises. You know, they were, you know, we would go on, we went to a wedding one time, we'd take a hairdryer with us and this would calm her down. To me, to this day, seems very, very atypical, but it's, again, what helps. What I tell people now is that this is a battle that's going to go on with kids like her and kids that are, you know, that just have, life is just a little more difficult for them. And what we're trying to do is solve that riddle of making the parents' experience better that are going through this traumatic journey with their son or daughter.
So at 15 or 16, how does it manifest itself? And as you said, you know, there's so many different, you know, the spectrum is a wide spectrum. Sure. And so there's different symptoms, or it manifests itself in different ways at different parts of the spectrum. And every human is different as well. So it probably manifests itself a little bit different with this individual than with another individual.
Yeah. I think in our journey, we don't know what to do, in the sense of, we go on these waves. I call them waves because,
she's a teenager and you're a parent. That's not all. Nobody knows what to do.
That's true. But these waves are, I think, atypical because they're either the best case or worst case scenarios. It's a true roller coaster, honestly. And what I get the most joy from is to see her smiling, you know, and being able to find out what that zen for her is. And she really enjoys music, and that helps her. But Um, this week has been a hard week, for example. I tell people, they don't do well when there's pressure of tests and finals and just things that take them out of their routine or brings them more impact. I mean, my daughter is one of the most routine oriented people. This is very true about kids that are high functioning, autistic, and low, they love routines. We all do, but if you take them away from that, it gets very, very difficult. So like, if you're asking me like right now, it's a very challenging time because was getting her best grades. And now for some reason, she's almost self-sabotaging it. It looks like to an objective person, but these are again, I just tell you that this, there's so much of an onion feeling that we don't know what to do sometimes.
Yeah.
And I'm in that space with all these other families that are the same. But what we do know is we know how to connect people with the right people in this town and in other towns to get the right behavioral services, to get the right ABA therapy, to get the right medical evaluations. The amount of families we've been able to impact through our foundation in the last year is over 20 families. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it is. What's ABA therapy?
These are kids that it's called applied behavioral. So these are people that are doctors in this space, and they help with helping these kids understand their emotions and their regulations, and hopefully get them to cope better, get them not to go from a 0 to a 10 all the time.
Yeah.
And these are very special people. You know, I'm trying to help a family right now where, their child was recently admitted to the hospital, and this kid's really struggling, and it's violent sometimes. It's threatening, it's self-harm. And I've experienced that myself. And, what I tell people now is I'm kind of tired being the rescuer in my own movie. I want to trust the experts, and that's where our foundation comes into play. That's where all these amazing donors have come into play to help us fund some amazing research initiatives and projects to really help families get a better result.
I want to conclude this topic with, when I look at teenagers or kids in general in this society, look at the stats. Suicide rates are way up. There are a lot of not good trends that we're seeing. I'm a big believer, I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, is it's because of these cell phones, social media, the comparison, the lack of self-security, self-confidence. And so I think that's an overarching theme for all adolescents, all youth at this point. For you, if a parent's listening to this and they're trying to decipher, or they would know by the time that a child is in their teenage years that it's different. It has been very different since they were born, correct?
Yeah, they were.
Because I'm some people, well, a lot of teenagers just in general are just all over the board. And now with phones, there's, like I said, we see the trends, but this is distinctly different and should be pretty identifiable whether someone needs to come to the Starry Foundation and say, Bobby, I need help. It's clear that our son or daughter is experiencing the exact same thing you just described. How do they tell the difference with so many adolescents really troubled mentally? And is this a genetic, this is more of a genetic type of, or is it, tell us how it happens, I guess.
Yeah, there's studies on this about genetics. I'm not going to speak to that. I think what we're trying to do is give people a multidisciplinary approach through our, what we do is we provide grants to families, and they go and they see one of the top doctors in this town. I mean, Dr. Gentry and Gentry Pediatrics is the best. That's where we send these very lucky families. He has an 18-month wait list, but because of our partnership and our synergies, these families get these comprehensive medical evaluations that will diagnose them with autism if they have it, but will give them a very good playbook. And that's what I'm most proud of, is just my relationship with Dr. Joseph Gentry and his team, because you have speech therapists involved, occupational therapists, you have feeding if we need it, and now we're trying to take it to another scale. And that being said, there's a lot of kids that are complex where they got this roadmap, and then at 14 it looks different.
Yeah.
There's now violence, and there's breaking phones, there's breaking TVs, and we gotta utilize some of our great partners. In the last year, we've been introduced to Banner Health. There's an amazing neuropsychologist that I'm talking to, and she's been coming to our fundraisers the last couple of years. Dr. Kate Bree, she's amazing. I reached out to her yesterday about a potential family that could use services that wouldn't fall under our foundation's abilities. So she opened up a door with an amazing doctor that's in the ABA world. So again, we're trying to connect some dots. And that's one thing that I'm most proud of, that is I connect dots for a living, whether it be for-profit people, nonprofit folks, our marketing people, our vendors, our relationships like the one I got connected to you with. That's something I pride myself in every day.
I'm going to pause my conversation with Bobby right there, and we'll pick up where we left off with part 2 of my conversation with him. We talk about fundraising and building relationships. We talk about lessons in raising capital, delivering unforgettable experiences. Bobby will talk about how important that has been for him and what has made Starry Foundation so successful, taking risks and overcoming fear. All of that will be in next week's episode, part 2 of my conversation with Bobby. You won't want to miss it. As it relates to our conversation today, if you're a parent who is in the situation that Bobby was in when he originally had his daughter Ellie, and your son or daughter is manifesting some of these signs that we've talked about, please don't hesitate to reach out to Bobby. I know he would want it. StarryFoundation.org. He has built a whole network around helping parents who aren't sure what the right answers or solutions are for their child who may be autistic or somewhere on the spectrum. Reach out, StarryFoundation.org. That's all the time that we have for this week's episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. Thank you so much for listening each and every week. Please reach out to me on Twitter. I love the interaction that I have with you as the listener. My handle is A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you get the updates every week when we post the video version. It's called the Andrew Holland Podcast. Or if you prefer to listen, please subscribe to the channel, like the episodes, the Andrew Holland Podcast on your favorite audio platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your other podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll be back next Wednesday with part 2 of my conversation with Bobby. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast, for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.